You know, the masterpiece? You know, you walk through the halls of a grand historical mansion and the layout just, it just makes sense.
Right.
The grand sweeping staircase is exactly where it needs to be to welcome guests. The dining room catches the evening light perfectly through those massive bay windows, and the flow from room to room just feels completely inevitable.
Yeah, totally inevitable.
Like, you look at it and you just assume it was always meant to look exactly that way. Right from the very first day, the architect put a pencil to a blank sheet of paper.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it feels like the result of a singular, flawless vision. When we look at a beloved piece of media or a masterpiece of architecture, we rarely stop to think about the eraser marks.
Exactly.
The mistakes. Right, we don't see the crumpled up sketches in the wastebasket or the dead-end ideas that would have completely compromised the structural integrity of the entire building. We only see the polished, final result.
But imagine you somehow got your hands on the original, unaired, first draft blueprint for that exact same mansion, and you unroll them on a table, fully expecting to see a slightly rougher, maybe less polished version of the house you already know and love. But instead, you look closely and you realize the architect originally planned for the kitchen to be suspended on the roof.
Wow.
Yeah, and the front door wasn't a door at all. It was a medieval drawbridge over a moat. Half the bedrooms were just missing entirely, and the basement was a literal labyrinth.
That's a completely different house.
Right. It's technically the same address. It has the same name on the deed, but it is a wildly unpredictable alternate reality. So, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, I have the actual unaired blueprints for one of the most acclaimed animated universes of all time.
I am so excited for this.
We were looking directly at the original series Bible for Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh, man.
And in these blueprints, the front door is a drawbridge, Uncle Iroh is a gaslighting traitor, and Aang isn't just the last airbender. He is the literal final avatar to ever exist.
That is just so heavy. And just to set the parameters for you, the listener, this document represents the raw, unfiltered ideas of two creators long before the army of other writers, storyboard artists, directors, and network executives got involved to sand down the edges.
Yeah, it's the unpolished truth.
Exactly. It's the foundational DNA of the show, but it is a version of the DNA that mutated in a completely different, frankly, direction.
Startling is definitely the word.
Our goal today is not just to point out the differences like a list of trivia. We are going to explore why those differences matter.
Right.
We want to understand how these early drafts reveal the core mechanics of story and what this radically different version of the Avatar universe teaches us about character development, world building, and, just the messy, chaotic reality of process.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because to truly understand how different this version of the story is, we have to start with the actual physics of the world.
The rules in the universe.
Exactly. Before we even meet a single character, we need to look at how the magic system, the bending, operated in this initial draft. In the universe we're all familiar with, bending is treated as an ancient martial art.
Right, it took years of practice.
Yeah, it requires immense physical discipline, spiritual alignment, all of that. It's relatively stable. But in this original series Bible, a bender's strength wasn't just about their personal skill. It was strictly mechanically tied to seasons and geography.
Which is a concept of intense environmental determinism.
Tell me about it.
Well, the document outlines a very rigid calendar of power. Waterbenders are explicitly at their absolute strongest in the dead of winter, and their power scales up the closer they are to the North and South Pole.
Which kind of makes sense intuitively.
It does.
Yeah.
And the presence of the moon and active rainfall give them an immediate, tangible boost in their out. Earthbenders, conversely, thrive in the spring, and they experience a massive power surge whenever they are physically near tectonic faults.
Okay, that's pretty.
Right. Airbenders peak during the autumn months and during active windstorm. And firebenders hit their absolute maximum potential in the summer, specifically near the planet's equator, with direct sunlight and passing comet providing massive enhancements to their fire generation.
Which, like, on a purely mechanical level, sounds like a really engaging way to build a tabletop role-playing game, right?
Oh, 100%.
You'd have to strategize based on the map and the calendar.
Yeah.
But here is the specific detail hidden in this lore that completely upends the entire political structure of the world.
This is the crazy part.
The source notes that benders are born according to the seasons. If you were born in winter, you were more likely to be a waterbender, and so on. But in this universe, the summers are actively linked.
Wow.
Yeah, whether it's artificial or a natural climate shift, the summer season is dominating the calendar. Therefore, the Fire Nation is literally, mathematically producing more benders than the other three nations combined.
While the other nations are experiencing a demographic collapse in their bending pop. What's fascinating here is the strategic brilliance of that lengthening summers concept and how it completely reframes the nature of the global conflict.
How so?
Well, If we examine the final aired version of the story, the Fire Nation's dominance is explained through the lens of industrial.
Right, the tanks and the airships.
Right. They have steam power, they have mechanized tanks, they have massive metal warship. Their success is a story about technological imperialism outpacing agrarian society. They are winning because they industrialized first.
They figured out how to burn coal to move metal, and they weaponized the Industrial Revolution against people still living in mud brick and ice structures.
Precise. But in this original draft, their dominance is stripped of that technological edge and replaced with a demographic and environmental.
The climate is basically rigged for them.
Yeah, the very climate of the planet is shifting to favor them. Technically, fire should be one of the more vulnerable elements in a one-on-one fight. Yeah, as the source document itself points out, a massive boulder can block fire, a wave of water extinguishes it, and a strong enough gust of air can snuff it out. Fire requires fuel and oxygen.
Yeah.
But if the Fire Nation has a massive, overwhelming numerical advantage simply because the summers are longer, they aren't winning through superior tactics or technology. They are winning through sheer demographic overwhelm. It's an environmental war.
I have to push back on this concept a little bit, though, especially from a storytelling perspective.
Sure, go ahead.
Because while the shifting global climate giving one nation a massive population boom is an incredibly cool macro-political concept, doesn't making the magic system this dependent on external environmental factors like rob the individual characters of their agency in a fight.
That's a fair point.
Think about how this plays out in a scene. If I'm an incredibly disciplined master earthbender fighting a novice firebender, but it happens to be mid-August and we are standing near the equator, do my decades of training even matter?
Right, you're at a massive disadvantage.
Or are the dice just loaded against me? It feels like the characters lose their ability to overcome obstacles through cleverness or willpower if the weather report dictates who wins the duel.
That is a highly perceptive critique of the mechanics, and it highlights exactly why writers often have to pull back from overly rigid magic systems.
It just boxes you into.
It does. If the outcome of every major confrontation is predetermined by the calendar or the geographic coordinates, you actively bleed the dramatic tension out of the story.
Yeah. I want to see the hero win because they earned it.
Exactly. You want your protagonist to win because they learned a new philosophy, or because they outsmarted their opponent, or because they pushed through their own emotional blockages. You don't want them to win just because a cold front happened to roll in on a Tuesday.
Right.
However, looking at it purely from the perspective of setting a narrative tone, this environmental imbalance serves a very... It communicates to the audience immediately that this world is fundamentally broke. The scales are tipped. The planet itself is out of alignment, and that physical misalignment mirrors the political and spiritual chaos era.
And speaking of a world being fundamentally broken, let's examine the origins of the 100-Year War in this draft, because the history we get in this series Bible is incredibly bleak.
It really is.
It lacks all the emotional nuance we eventually got. In the final show, the tragedy of the war's origin is deeply, intimately personal. Fire Lord Sozin and Avatar Roku weren't just political figures. They were childhood best friends.
Right. They shared secrets. They trained together.
Exactly. The entire global war started because of a tragic ideological split between two men who viewed each other as brothers. The global conflict is just a macrocosm of a broken friendship.
It anchors the geopolitics in deeply recognizable human emotion. The betrayal of a profound, lifelong friendship is something an audience can immediately grasp and feel devastated by.
But when we look at this original draft, none of that personal tragedy exists. So Sozin and Roku were never friends.
Not at all.
They didn't grow up together. So Sozin is introduced purely as an evil ruler, a tyrant who ascended to the throne and immediately constantly tried to drag the entire globe into warfare.
So he's just bad from day one.
Pretty much. And Roku didn't have a tragic blind spot for his old friend. Roku basically just spent his entire adult life acting as a cosmic police officer, flying around the world and constantly swatting down Sozin's various schemes.
It replaces a complex Shakespearean tragedy with a much more traditional, straightforward hero versus villain dynamic from the very beginning of their respective lives.
Yeah, it's a lot simpler.
It's the classic paradigm of the pure-hearted guardian perpetually holding back the inherently evil conqueror. But the truly alarming detail in this lore emerges when we look at what happens immediately after Roku dies of unknown natural causes.
Right, because Sozin doesn't just spontaneously decide to attack the day Roku died. The source material reveals a horrifying level of patience.
Oh, this part is chilling.
It states that Sozin spent 12 entire years in absolute impenetrable secrecy, building a massive armada of ships and cultivating a huge, highly trained army of firebenders. 12 years of secret military buildup before launching his first strike.
The logistics of that are fascinating to consider. How does a nation mobilize its entire industrial and military sector, construct an armada capable of global conquest, and train a generation of soldiers without any spies from the Earth Kingdom or the Water Tribes noticing?
I mean, they'd have to lock down their borders completely.
It requires an almost impossible level of isolationism and internal control. But putting the logistical improbability aside, it speaks to a level of calculated, cold-blooded planning that makes Sozin an incredibly terrifying figure.
He's playing the long game.
He wasn't just an opportunist waiting for the Avatar to die. He was systematically manufacturing the apocalypse in the shadows year after year by time.
And when his time finally comes, when Sozin's comet arrives to give his benders that massive summer boost, the way he utilizes it is entirely different from the canon we know.
Oh, this is a massive change.
We all know the horrific, chilling lore of the final show. The Fire Nation used the sheer, overwhelming power of the comet to wipe out the air nomads in a single, devastating night. It was a blitzkrieg, a sudden, inescapable inferno.
Right.
But in this alternate reality, the series Bible states that it takes the Fire Nation over a full month to wipe out the air nomads.
Consider the psychological terror of that difference.
Yeah.
A month-long, systematic eradication.
It's awful to even think about.
It changes the event from a singular night of overwhelming sudden destruction, a flash of unimaginable violence, to a prolonged, agonizing military siege against full monastic.
Because it means they had time to react.
Exactly. It implies that the air nomads fought back or hid or tried to evade capture for weeks on end while the skies burn above. It turns a massacre into a grinding war of attrition against passive.
And this brings us to the single most devastating piece of lore in the entire document, the concept of the broken cycle.
Yes, this is huge.
The source material states that wiping out the air nomads disrupted the natural order of the planet so severely that it made future Avatar reincarnations impossible.
The narrative weight of that single sentence cannot be overstated. It redefines the very nature of the protagonist.
How so?
Well, in this specific draft, the Avatar is described not just as a powerful bender who acts bridge between worlds, but as the literal spirit of the planet made manifest.
I really want you, the listener, pause and let that sink in. The spirit of the planet and human. If this specific Avatar dies, there is no next.
It's over.
The chain is broken.
In the familiar version of the story, Aang's terror is rooted in cultural loneliness. He is terrified because he is the last survivor he is the last airbender.
Right.
If he fails to stop the Fire Lord, the world falls to imperialism. But presumably, the cosmological cycle would continue. The Avatar spirit would eventually be reborn into the Water Tribe, and a new child would eventually rise to try and restore balance.
There's always going to be another Avatar.
There is a cosmic safety net, but in this draft, that safety net has been completely obliterated. The cycle is shattered. Aang isn't just the last airbender, he is the absolute last Avatar.
What?
If his heart stops beating, the planetary spirit dies with him.
Which completely and utterly changes the psychological pressure placed on a 12-year-old boy.
Oh, definitely.
It's one thing to wake up from an iceberg and have people tell you, hey kid, you have incredible powers and you need to use them to save the world. That's standard hero's journey stuff.
Right?
It's an entirely different level of trauma to wake up and hear, hey kid, you are the final terminal defense mechanism this planet will ever produce for the rest of eternity. If you make a mistake, the spirit of the earth itself ceases to exist. It is an unfathomable, paralyzing burden.
And that immense, crushing, apocalyptic pressure forces us to look at how these characters actually behave when they are first introduced to each other.
Because it's not pretty.
Not at all. Because when you place that level of existential weight on a group of unprepared children, you do not magically produce the wholesome, supportive, incredibly tightly knit found family dynamic that made the final show so iconic.
No, you definitely don't.
You produce chaos. You produce resentment, fear, and profound interpersonal dysfunction.
You get a pressure cooker of trauma. So let's look at how Aang's original characterization reflects that pressure.
Yeah.
The source material leans heavily, and I mean heavily, into Aang acting as a trickster figure.
Yes.
The creators explicitly label him a trickster in the text. He plays elaborate pranks. He purposely and deliberately breaks ancient traditions just for the sake of it. He actively ignores good advice from his elders, and he constantly takes the most roundabout, frustrating path possible to avoid dealing with reality.
It's a recognizable archetype in early character drafting, particularly in media aimed at younger audiences.
Right, the troublemaker.
The creators were clearly trying to establish the irresponsible prodigy trope, the immensely gifted child who has to learn maturity the hard way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The source even compares this early iteration of Aang to a loud, hyperactive anime protagonist, waking up hungry, instantly demanding adventure, and generally being framed as the chaotic core problem in the lives of everyone.
He is basically a walking liability. And the lore gives us this incredibly specific, almost bizarre detail about his actual airbending training before he ran away.
The levels, right?
Yes. It outlines that the discipline of airbending has exactly 36 levels of mastery. Aang, being a prodigy, flew through his training and mastered 35 of those levels with ease, but he severely, continuously struggles with a 36th and final level.
The structure of 36 levels is likely a direct homage to classic martial arts cinema, specifically the 36 Chambers of Shaolin.
Oh, that's a cool connection.
But the psychological implication behind his failure is what we need to analyze. Why is a prodigy who mastered 35 levels suddenly unable to grasp the final?
It has to be mental.
It strongly suggests a subconscious refusal. It's a psychological block. He is refusing to accept the mantle of full mastery because he knows that passing that final test means accepting the apocalyptic responsibility of being the Avatar.
Exactly. He ran away because he was terrified of that final step. And here is a fascinating detail about his character design. In this draft, his iconic blue arrow tattoos are not a symbol of that mastery.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they aren't something he earned. They are explicitly described in the Bible as a constant physical reminder to him of his true goal, finding the air nomads.
Wait, finding?
Yes, he genuinely, deeply believes his people are still out there hiding somewhere in the world. Searching for them is his entire motivation. He is living in total denial. But his avoidance of his avatar duties brings us to his relationship with Katara. And this is where the series Bible takes a massive, incredibly dark left turn that changes the entire flavor of the show.
In the established lore that audiences know, Katara serves as the unconditional, empathetic heart of the... She is hopeful, she is deeply maternal, and fiercely protective of Aang from the very moment she pulls him out of the ice. She is his anchor.
But in this version, the dynamic is poisoned from the start. Katara and Sokka eventually find out the truth about Aang's path. They realize he didn't just accidentally get frozen. They realize he ran away from the air temple because he was scared of his responsibilities.
He chose to hide.
Yeah, they realize he essentially spent 100 years trapped in the ice by his own choice, avoiding the war. And when Katara learns this, she doesn't offer him grace or understanding. She becomes furious. The source material explicitly states her internal logic. She believes that if Aang had simply stayed at the temple and done his job as the Avatar, the 100-year war would never have started, and therefore she actively, directly blames Aang for the death of her mother.
We really need to pause and analyze the sheer gravity of that character choice. She blames the 12-year-old protagonist for the violent murder of her.
It's so intense.
This isn't just a simple disagreement or a personality clash. This fundamentally alters the bedrock. It introduces a level of deep-seated resentment, bitterness, and complex trauma that is almost impossible to navigate in a narrative about teamwork.
Right.
You have to ask yourself, could a children's animated show have survived its two primary leads starting their epic journey with such a profoundly toxic, guilt-ridden dynamic?
I genuinely don't think it could have. Imagine tuning in on a Saturday morning, looking for a fun adventure show, and watching the compassionate female lead look this goofy 12-year-old boy in the eye and say, "My mother was murdered because you were a coward."
It's way too heavy.
It is so incredibly heavy, it completely destroys the warmth and the charm of the first season. And the way Aang reacts to this accusation makes the situation exponentially worse.
Because he wants to fix it.
Right, because Katara is furious with him, and because he feels this crushing guilt, Aang desperately wants to prove to her that he is responsible now. He wants to prove he can end the war. So he bypasses all the rules of bending discipline and decides he needs to learn to firebend immediately, way before he has mastered water or earth.
Which is a disastrous, impulsive decision born entirely out of trauma, guilt, and a desperate need for validation rather than any kind of spiritual wisdom or readiness.
And the result is catastrophic. In his reckless attempt to force the fire element, he loses control and accidentally burns Katara's hands.
Oh no!
Yeah. He physically injures the girl who already blames him for her mother's death. The trauma of this specific event is so severe that it causes Aang to swear a solemn vow never to firebend again.
This sequence of events raises an incredibly important question about narrative pacing and how writers deploy character trauma.
What do you mean?
Well, in the final aired version of the show, Aang does, in fact, accidentally burn Katara while impatiently trying to learn firebending from the master Zhang.
Right, that still happened.
But crucially, that event happens midway through the first season, long after their mutual bond of trust and affection is already rock solid.
They're already close friends by then.
Exactly. In that context, the burn serves as a necessary, sobering lesson in patience and the inherently destructive nature of fire. It's a hurdle they overcome together. But if you front-load that exact same trauma right at the very beginning of the story, when Katara already harbors deep resentment toward him, it doesn't read as a...
No, it reads like a disaster.
It reads as a relational rift that feels entirely unbridgeable.
Right, it's just piling misery on top of misery. It makes you wonder why they are even traveling together, though. And Sokka's reaction to this absolute train wreck of a dynamic is the perfect encapsulation of how broken the group is.
What does he do?
He witnesses Katara blaming Aang for their mother's death. He watches Aang recklessly burn his sister's hand, and Sokka simply decides he has had it. He concludes that he doesn't have the patience or the emotional bandwidth to deal with these magical, destructive people, and he just leaves.
Wait, he just leaves.
He straight up abandons Team Avatar.
Which forces us to look closely at Sokka's original characterization in this draft, which is fascinatingly cynical.
Yeah, he's very different here.
The source document notes that Sokka is openly and vehemently anti-bending. He doesn't just lack bending abilities, he harbors a deeply ingrained philosophical prejudice against anyone who has them.
He hates all benders.
Yes, he genuinely believes that benders, all of them, regardless of nation, are the fundamental reason the world is in such a catastrophic state of perpetual warfare. His worldview is deeply pragmatic. He believes that ordinary men like him, relying on steel, strategy, and sweat, are the only ones who can defeat the Fire Nation and clean up the mess that the magical elites create.
But you know, as much as I hate the toxic, heavy dynamic between Katara and Aang in this draft, I have to admit that Sokka's original character arc here is actually phenomenal.
It's very strong.
Think about the mechanics of his journey. Here's where it gets really interesting. He abandons the group because of his prejudice. He goes off on his own and manages to join another group of traditional warriors because his deepest, most desperate desire is to be a revered soldier, just like his father.
Right, he romanticizes it.
He thinks war is glorious, but then he actually gets what he wants. He experiences a real, brutal battle. And the source document explicitly states that his romanticized fantasy of the warrior lifestyle is completely violently shattered by the grim reality of actual warfare.
That's a harsh wake-up call.
Yeah, this traumatic realization forces him to grow up instantly. He discovers his true role as a strategic leader rather than just a frontline fighter, and he eventually returns to the group with a completely new perspective.
It is a remarkably sophisticated, tightly compressed coming-of-age arc. It completely removes his initial role as the primary source of comic relief and forces him to confront the grim, bloody reality of the world.
He grows up fast.
He idolized the concept of war, and the reality of war broke that idol. When he finally returns to Team Avatar, he isn't returning because he failed or because he has nowhere else to go. He is returning with a tempered, mature understanding of leadership and the absolute necessity of ending the conflict.
It's such a good arc.
For a young adult story, pushing a character through that level of disillusionment is a very bold, mature narrative choice.
It really is. I kind of wish they had found a way to keep a piece of that shattered fantasy arc for him in the final cut, maybe stretching it out over a few episodes.
That's been great.
But regardless, Sokka returns, the group manages a tenuous reconciliation, and they head to the Northern Water Tribe to find a master. And structurally, this part of the blueprint remains surprisingly similar to the canon we know.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they arrive, but the fiercely traditional, sexist, water-bending master flat out refuses to teach Katara because she is a girl. Aang begins his training, but he struggles so profoundly with the emotional discipline of water that the master actually gives up on him entirely, labeling him completely unteachable.
So Katara has to step up.
Exactly. Katara refuses to accept the sexism. She publicly challenges and fights the master to prove her undeniable worth. She wins his grudging respect, and ultimately they both become his students.
And this training arc culminates in the massive siege of the Northern Water Tribe by Commander Zhao's armada.
Right.
The defense of the city relies on Aang tapping into a state of immense power, creating a colossal water tornado with the direct assistance of the Old Master to systematically dismantle and destroy the Fire Nation ship.
Sounds apt.
It is, but what is truly vital to analyze here is what is entirely missing from.
What's missing?
There is absolutely no mention of the intricate, beautiful spiritual elements that define the final version of this climate. The physical manifestations of the moon and ocean spirits circling in the oasis, the catastrophic loss of the moon turning the sky red, Princess Yu's heartbreaking sacrifice to restore the spirit. None of that exists in this raw series Bible.
Wow, so no spirit world stuff at all.
None. The finale of Book 1 is envisioned as a much more straightforward, physically grounded military defense, utilizing raw elemental power, completely devoid of the ethereal, mythological weight that eventually made the episode a masterpiece.
Which means they win the battle, but the victory feels purely tactical rather than spiritual.
Yeah.
And that sets the stage for Book 2.
And book 2 is where things get really messy.
Oh, you have no idea. Now, if you thought the interpersonal chaos within Team Avatar was bad in book 1, wait until we look at what happens when they venture into the Earth Kingdom, because the group's search for an earthbending teacher introduces a character that completely upends their fragile dynamic all over again.
Toph.
Yes, Toph. We all know and revere Toph Bifong. She is the blind, wildly sarcastic, fiercely independent, and incredibly powerful young girl who single-handedly invents metal bending. She's a defining icon of the series.
Absolutely.
But in this alternate reality blueprint, Toph is conceptualized as a young, intensely arrogant, blind, earthbending boy.
A boy?
Yep, a teenage boy.
The gender swap is certainly a notable surface-level change, but the shift in personality and how that personality fractures the group dynamics is what truly alters the trajectory of the narrative.
It really does.
This male Toph is introduced to the team, and his arrogance apparently perfectly matches his immense geological power. But the real disruption doesn't come from his earthbend. It comes from how the rest of the group react presently.
Yeah, the source material reveals that the introduction of male Toph sparks a full-blown teenage soap opera. It outlines that Katara is immediately strongly drawn to this boy Toph, precisely because of his unwavering confidence and raw power. Sparks are actively flying between them.
Aang is not going to like that.
Aang, who is already carrying immense guilt and who harbors deep, unrequited feelings for Katara, becomes intensely, irrationally jealous of this new rival. And Sokka deeply dislikes Toph from the moment they meet.
Why does Sokka hate him?
He refuses to trust him. He suspects that Katara only likes Toph out of some misplaced sympathy for his blindness. And worst of all, Sokka intensely resents Toph for constantly usurping his newly forged role as the strategic leader of the group.
If we connect this to the bigger picture of narrative design, it becomes blindingly obvious why the writers ultimately took a step back, looked at the board, and scrapped this entire concept.
Yeah, it's a...
When you introduce a complex romantic rivalry, a love triangle, or even a love square if you factor in the cut ideas mentioned later in the document about Zuko potentially harboring Katara, you immediately hijack the narrative focus of your own story.
Right, it becomes all about who likes who.
Exact. The core premise of the show is supposed to be about traumatized children burdened with the impossible task of ending a century-long genocidal globe. If you bog your central cast down in episodes focused on petty jealousy, resentment over who gets to give orders, and prolonged romantic angst, you drastically diminish the epic scale and the life or death overarching.
It takes a sweeping fantasy epic and shrinks it down into a CW teen drama.
It really does.
And honestly, it completely ruins the unique, fiercely loyal, found family dynamic that made the final version of Team Avatar so enduringly special. We love these characters because they consistently choose to support each other against a world that wants to destroy them. In this draft, they're constantly at each other's throats, fighting internal battles instead of fighting the Fire Nation.
It's so counterproductive.
But the drama isn't just internal. Externally, their journey through the Earth Kingdom is getting incredibly strained because Zuko is still relentlessly hunting them. And in this version, Zuko manages to achieve the unthinkable. He captures Appa.
Wait, he captured...
And he captures him alive.
We really must question the logistical mechanics of that. How exactly does a single teenage firebender operating with a small crew manage to capture a massive, highly intelligent, flying, six-legged bison alive?
I have no idea. I mean, does Zuko just have some kind of superhuman Captain America-level strength in this draft? Or did they employ a massive net laced with some kind of chi-blocking toxin?
It's baffling.
The document doesn't specify the how, but it does specify the why. Zuko captures Appa, not just to ground the Avatar, but to present the beast as a living, exotic gift for his father, Fire Lord Ozai, hoping to win back his favor.
Oh, that makes sense for Zuko's character.
And this single action forces Team Avatar into a completely different, painfully slow mode of transportation. Without their flying bison to soar over enemy lines, they are forced to travel deep into the Earth Kingdom by navigating down winding rivers on rudimentary rafts, relying entirely on Katara's continuous waterbending to propel them against.
It is a fundamental structural change to the pacing of the entire story.
Because they can't just fly everywhere.
Right. In the final show, the sheer freedom of flight provided by Appa allowed the narrative to be a true, expansive, globe-trotting adventure. They could cross continents in days, making the story highly episodic and constantly varied in its locations and culture.
Yeah, every episode was a new town.
By grounding them and restricting their movement strictly to river rafts, the narrative momentum slows to an apt crawl. It makes the journey feel much more grueling, claustrophobic, and strictly linear, as they are literally bound by the geography of the river.
Grueling is definitely the right word. Especially when they finally exhaustingly reach the Earth Kingdom's massive capital city, because this is where we encounter what I truly believe might be the single most baffling, bizarre narrative choice in the entire series Bible.
More bizarre than capturing Appa.
Oh, absolutely. They manage to secure an audience with the Earth Emperor. And during this meeting, the Emperor tells Aang a massive, top-secret, highly detailed plan for a coordinated counterattack against the Fire Nation.
Okay, that sounds important.
It is. But in a bizarre twist of royal protocol, he makes Aang swear a solemn vow not to reveal the secret plan to anyone else.
Wait, he demands a vow of absolute silence regarding vital, actionable military intelligence from the one person who the job it is to coordinate the defense of the world.
Yes, it makes absolutely no sense.
That's absurd.
But Aang, being the Avatar, still desperately needs his friends to know the plan so they can help him execute it. So how does he handle this? Because he promised the Emperor he wouldn't directly tell anyone, Aang decides that the best course of action is to speak to his friends entirely in convoluted, cryptic riddles.
Riddles? You're joking.
I am not. He spends days hoping his friends will just magically guess the exact details of a secret military invasion plan, operating under the childish logic that if they guess it, he technically hasn't broken his promise to the Emperor.
From a structural storytelling perspective, this is a highly problematic, deeply frustrating device.
So annoying.
It artificially inflates the tension of the episode through deliberate miscommunication rather than genuine conflict. The tension doesn't arise from the characters facing a formidable external obstacle or a moral dilemma or a powerful enemy. It relies entirely on the protagonist stubbornly withholding crucial information from his own desperately loyal ally based on a flimsy semantic technicality.
It is so incredibly frustrating to even read. It perfectly mirrors the experience of playing a poorly run tabletop role-playing game.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
You know the scenario. The game master has all the cool essential quest information hidden behind their screen, but they refuse to just give the players the plot hook. So the game master makes the players jump through all these incredibly annoying artificial hoops, rolling dice and solving pointless puzzles just to figure out what they're actually supposed to be doing. It drags the narrative momentum to a grinding halt for absolutely no dramatic payoff.
It certainly strains credulity to its absolute breaking point to suggest that the fate of the entire world and the success of a massive military op would hinge on a group of stressed teenagers successfully solving word puzzles to uncover their own army's invasion.
It's just bad writing.
But eventually, by the end of the spring season, they manage to navigate this artificial roadblock. They decipher the riddles and reach a hidden, heavily fortified camp where the Earth Kingdom military is secretly building a fleet of giant battleships, aided by the ex of the Water Tribe, which notably includes Hakoda, Katara, and Sokka's father.
Which sets the grand stage for the Day of the Black Sun. Now, in the canon show that we all revere, the solar eclipse is presented as the ultimate desperate assassination attempt.
Right, the invasion.
It is the culmination of seasons of planning. It features Team Avatar and a small, fiercely dedicated group of ragtag allies infiltrating the heavily guarded Fire Nation capital, utilizing the 8 minutes of the eclipse to find Ozai, strip him of his bending, and end the war in one decisive fell swoop. It is incredibly high-stake, personal, and...
But in this alternate reality blueprint, the narrative importance and the scale of the eclipse drastically, almost shockingly scaled.
Yeah, it's nothing.
The source document explicitly states that this invasion was never about taking out the fire. It was never an assassination attempt designed to end the war on that. Instead, it was conceived merely as a grand tactical maneuver. The Earth Kingdom simply uses the eclipse and the corresponding temporary loss of all fire as a brief window to forcefully advance their ground troops Fire Nation territory. The entire goal is just to capture as much physical land as possible before Sozin's comet inevitably arrives to turn the tide back.
It's just a massive land grab, a strategic border push, which, if we are being completely honest, actually makes a lot more logical military sense for a massive standing army to execute.
It does make military sense.
Yes, but narrative, it completely guts the intense, highly personal climax of a small team confronting the ultimate villain during his one moment of physical weakness.
It removes the personal stakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The only truly resonant character moment we get during this entire military operation belongs to Sokka. During the battle, his father, Hakoda, asks Sokka to fight alongside him on the front lines, man to man, father to son.
Which is exactly what Sokka wanted earlier.
It's what Sokka always wanted in Book 1. But Sokka makes a crucial choice. He respectfully declines, choosing instead to stay by Aang's side. He fully, deeply believes in Aang's ultimate destiny now, and he willingly takes on the quiet, unglamorous responsibility of ensuring the Avatar survives to reach his final.
It is a profound, quiet completion of the character arc that began when Sokka abandoned the group's disgust back. He has systematically moved from idolizing his father's blunt, physical concept of warfare to recognizing the unique, essential, spiritual necessity of the Avatar's overarching. He actively chooses the harder, less glorified path of protecting the world's savior, rather than fulfilling his childhood fantasy of just being another honored soldier on the battle.
It's a genuinely great, mature moment for Sokka. But while Aang and his friends are fumbling their way through the Earth Kingdom with their slow river rafts, their annoying riddles, and their internal jealousies, massive shifts are happening over in the Fire Nation.
Right, we have to talk about Zuko.
And this brings us to the political heart of the story, focusing on Zuko, Azula, or rather Azul, and the theme of sabotage. Because the narrative playing out on the other side of the world is surprisingly much darker, heavily steeped in political intrigue, deeply tragic.
To understand this tragedy, we must fundamentally re-examine the character of Uncle Iroh in this draft.
Oh.
For millions of fans worldwide, Iroh is the absolute paragon of wisdom, warmth, and redemption. He is the loving, patient mentor who gently guides scarred, furious nephew toward the light, offering cups of jasmine and profound philosophical insights about balance and harmony.
We all love Iroh.
He is the unshakable moral anchor of the entire Fire Nation.
So I need you, the listener, to brace yourself.
Yeah.
Because in this original series Bible, Uncle Iroh is absolutely not a loving mentor.
That's hard to hear.
He is not a secret, high-ranking member of the Benevolent Order of the White Lotus. The source material explicitly reveals that Iroh is operating under strict, direct, secret orders from his brother, Fire Lord Ozai, to teach Zuko fundamentally incorrect firebending techniques.
Wow.
Yeah. Iroh's entire singular purpose on that ship is to actively, maliciously sabotage his own nephew's martial arts training to guarantee that Zuko never, ever becomes strong enough to challenge or surpass his father.
The sheer psychological horror of this dynamic is staggering. Let's analyze the mechanics. In the familiar canon, Zuko struggles to master advanced firebend because his internal drive is entirely fueled by raw rage and a desperate, agonizing...
Right, it's an emotional block.
Yeah. This emotional turmoil fundamentally disrupts his internal chi. He fails because he lacks... It is a spiritual block. But in this alternate draft, Zuko's failure isn't spiritual and it isn't emotional. It is purely structural and...
Meaning he's just being lied to.
Exact. The source document explicitly notes that Zuko is, in reality, a martial arts prodigy. He is incredibly naturally gifted, but his progress is being systematically, purposely, and expertly sabotaged by the only adult family member who seemingly shows him an ounce of affection.
It is so incredibly messed up. It completely inverts Iroh's character, transforming him from the ultimate loving surrogate father figure into a treacherous gaslighting spy.
A gaslighting spy, that's a perfect...
The document even notes that Iroh spends most of his time acting like a buffoon, serving as comic relief on the ship, specifically to mask his betrayal and keep Zuko completely off balance.
That is so sinister.
And this betrayal makes Zuko's desperate attempts to please his father even more heartbreaking. There is a specific tragic detail in the source that mentions Zuko is constantly obsessively sending Ozai battle trophies from his travels around the world. He is even spending his time constructing a massive, elaborate metal statue of Ozai, pouring his soul into trying to earn back a fraction of his father's love. And Ozai, knowing full well that Iroh is crippling his son's abilities, just cruelly, silently rejects all of it.
It fundamentally transforms Zuko's overarching narrative from a beautiful journey of spiritual awakening and self-discovery into a grim story of profound systemic betrayal.
Every effort he makes,
every single effort, every drop of sweat he pours into his train, and this deep, unspoken sense of betrayal, even before he consciously realized, directly informs the radical shift in his character motive when he finally returns to the Fire Nation capital.
Right. So Zuko finally returns home. But instead of being the conflicted prince awkwardly trying to fit back into the opulent royal court and wrestling with his conscience, he looks around with fresh eyes and sees something that completely radicalizes.
What does he see?
He realizes that his own people, the everyday citizens of the Fire Nation, are essentially enslaved. They're living in absolute grinding poverty, their resources completely drained, their lives crushed under the immense weight of Ozai's endless, hungry war machine.
So he sees the reality of the war on his own.
Exactly. And seeing this economic devastation, Zuko makes a radical choice. He speaks out against Ozai again, but this time he doesn't do it to win his honor. He vows to actively take the throne. Not by right of succession, but for the people.
It is the birth of a genuine popular...
Yeah, a revolution.
He no longer simply wants his royal honor restored. He wants to entirely dismantle the oppressive militaristic regime that is actively starving its own imperial citizens to fund a global conquest. He physically symbolizes this break by growing his hair out. He abandons the palace. He goes into deep hiding among the ordinary working-class people in a small village, and he begins to meticulously plan a grassroots revolution from the bottom up.
I really have to pause and ask you about this because it sparks such a fascinating debate about character. Is this populist revolutionary motivation actually stronger, from a narrative standpoint than the final version's arc?
That's a great question.
Let's look at the mechanic. In the show, we know Zuko's redemption is deeply, entirely internal. He finally achieves everything he thought he ever wanted: his father's conditional love, his honor, his high-status place at court. And sitting in that victory, he realizes it feels hollow and wrong. It's a profound moral awakening based on his own internal compass.
Right, it's an internal realization.
But in this trap, his motivation is external. He is fighting for the impoverished working class. He is witnessing the stark economic devastation of his own people. Doesn't fighting an oppressive system on behalf of the poor make Zuko more of a traditional Robin Hood-style hero? Which arc is actually better?
It is a highly compelling argument, and one that highlights the tension between political storytelling and deeply personal. A populist Zuko grounds the narrative in the grim, realistic socioeconomic realities of perpetual war.
It shows the cost of the war at home.
Yes. It powerfully demonstrates that imperialism ultimately hurts the imperial citizens just as much as it hurts the conquered nation. It's a very sophisticated mess. However, I would strongly argue that the internal moral awakening of the final aired version is ultimately more powerful in character development.
Why do you think that is?
The populist arc makes Zuko a hero who recognizes and fights an external systemic injustice. He looks outside and sees bad things happening. But the internal arc makes Zuko a hero who must fight and overcome his own deeply ingrained, lifelong indoctrination. He looks inside and sees the bad thing accepted.
Oh, that's a good point.
Overcoming the self, realizing that your own desires were toxic, is almost always a more resonant, universally relatable narrative journey than simply recognizing that the government is corrupt.
That is a phenomenal distinction. Overcoming the self versus overcoming the system. The internal struggle just hits harder emotionally. But regardless of his motivation, Zuko's populist revolution eventually brings him face-to-face with Team Avatar once again.
Right, they have to team up eventually.
He realizes pragmatically that he cannot defeat Ozai and the entire military apparatus alone, so he tracks down Aang and formally asks for an alliance. Sokka, entirely consistent with his character, naturally assumes it's an elaborate trap.
Of course he does.
But Katara, interestingly, senses a genuine fundamental change in Zuko's demeanor, and she agrees to help him, specifically in exchange for Zuko providing much-needed firebending lessons for Aang.
And it is precisely here, in the quiet moments of training, that the devastating tragedy of Iroh's lifelong sabotage finally culminates.
This part is just gut-wrenching.
It is. Zuko attempts with genuine earnest to train the Avatar. For weeks, they drill and practice together, but Aang is still deeply paralyzed by the lingering psychological trauma and fear of fire stemming from when he burned Katara back in Book 1.
He's terrified of hurting her again.
Exact. And worse, as Zuko tries to break down the mechanics of his bending to teach it, he eventually confronts Iroh and uncovers the horrific, staggering truth. His entire foundational understanding of firebending entirely.
Try to imagine the sheer crushing weight of that realization. Everything you have practiced your entire life, every form, every breathing technique, every drop of sweat you poured into mastering your art was a deliberate, calculated lie designed by your own family to keep you permanently weak.
It is a betrayal that shatters his reality.
Just shatters it.
And because Zuko possesses the integrity to realize that his own firebending is fundamentally mechanically flawed at its core, he comes to the painful conclusion that Ammon cannot possibly learn from. The blind cannot lead the blind. If Zuko teaches Aang his forms, he will only be passing on Iroh's crippled version of the art. This failed alliance forces a devastating, terrifying realization upon the entire. Aang is not going to master firebending before Sozin's comet arrives in the sky.
The clock has officially run out. They are out of time.
Yeah.
And this realization brings us to the climax of the entire series. Because knowing that Aang cannot be taught firebending forces the group into a desperate, premature final confrontation.
They have to move.
Yeah, they debate waiting, maybe trying to find another master, but Aang knows that if they wait, Ozai will use the immense summer comet power to completely annihilate the Earth Kingdom army. So Aang makes a solitary, incredibly reckless, almost suicidal choice.
What does he do?
He decides he cannot wait for his friend. He flies off entirely alone, heading straight for Ozai's heavily fortified stronghold to end the war right then and there.
It is a bold decision, clearly driven by the overwhelming singular burden he carries as the absolute last avatar. He feels he must sacrifice himself to protect the cycle.
Right.
But his lack of preparation is immediately apparent. When he arrives at the massive fortress, he walks straight into a meticulously planned trap. Hundreds of elite firebenders instantly surround him, cutting off any avenue of escape. And in response to this overwhelming lethal threat, his avatar spirit triggers a massive, autonomous, involuntary defense.
And this defense mechanism is, well, honestly wild to visualize.
Oh, this part.
Aang's arrow tattoos begin to glow with cosmic energy, and the avatar spirit, acting purely on survival instinct, literally pulls the earth up around him and seals Aang inside a giant, utterly impenetrable sphere of solid stone.
He locks himself in a rock.
He just automatically locks himself inside a massive rock. The surrounding firebenders, unable to penetrate it, literally have to pick up this massive stone ball, carry it deep into the fortress, and drop it directly in front of Ozai's throne.
And they can't break it open?
No. The source document explicitly states that even Fire Lord Ozai, with all his immense power, cannot break the shell. He has to sit there and wait for the celestial power of the comet to arrive just to crack the rock open.
It is, without question, a profound narrative anticlimax.
It really, truly is. I mean, think about how this would look on screen. It feels like an absurd slapstick cartoon sketch.
It does.
You have the ultimate terrifying villain of the entire series, the ruthless Fire Lord, just pacing around his throne room, occasionally tapping on a heavily armored rock egg, checking his watch, and literally waiting for a celestial event to give him enough juice to hatch the protagonist so he can finally fight him. It completely, utterly diffuses all the tension that the series has been building for years.
We must ask why the writers would consider such a bizarre choice.
Any ideas?
Well, by locking Aang in the stone sphere, the writers forcefully remove the protagonist's agency entirely at the most critical, pivotal juncture of the overarching story. It seems they did this specifically to force a shift in narrative focus.
Oh, to focus on the side characters.
Yes. While Aang is safe, if absurdly, hibernating in his impenetrable rock, the massive burden of the narrative action shifts entirely supporting cast. Zuko and Katara have infiltrated the fortress but have been captured by Ozai's force. Sokka and Toph have narrowly escaped capture, and they quickly realize that the fate of the entire world now rests on them Mount possible.
Right, the side characters have to step up. And Sokka and Toph track the captured members back to the massive fortress. And here, in the bowels of the stronghold, they finally find Appa, who has apparently just been chained up in a dungeon this entire time.
Poor Bison, I know.
Sokka manages to free the massive flying bison, and together, utilizing Toph's earthbending and Sokka's strategy, they actually manage to hijack a massive, fully operational Fire Nation warship.
Wait, they steal a warship?
They literally use this stolen metal warship to brutally ram and destroy the rest of the Fire Nation's airborne airship fleet, clearing the skies for the advancing Earth Kingdom ground forces.
It is an incredibly heavy, shockingly militaristic climax supporting cast. They are engaging in massive vehicular warfare, directly causing immense destruction. And amidst this fiery chaos in the skies, we finally get the resolution of the fractured royal family conflict.
The final showed.
But it is vital to note that this resolution is absolutely not the poetic, emotionally devastating, gorgeously animated Agikai between Zuko and Azula that we recognize today as a mass of anime.
No, it is not even close to that level of art. First of all, we have to remember from the very beginning of this deep dive, Azula doesn't exist.
Right, Prince.
She is a male character named Prince. And the final confrontation between these brothers isn't a tragic, beautifully scored, highly disciplined duel of clashing blue and orange flames, highlighting their different philosophies. The source document just describes it as a chaotic brawl.
A brawl.
Zuko and Katara manage to break free from their captors, and they essentially just gang up on Prince Azula. It's a 2v1 street fight, and they just beat him down until he yields. It's over just like that.
It completely lacks the deep thematic resonance and the tragic dichotomy of the siblings' relationship that made the final version so compelling.
It's just a beatdown.
Exactly. But the true world-altering climax finally arrives with the passing of the comet. The celestial event occurs, the sky burns red, Ozai's fire-bending power exponentially doubles, and he finally possesses the raw, brute thermal strength required to shatter Aang's stone. The rock breaks apart, and the final battle for the fate of the planet.
And Aang is immediately forced on the defensive. He's utilizing incredible feats of air, water, and earth to protect himself, but Ozai clearly, undeniably has the upper hand due to the massive power boost from the comet.
Because Aang can't firebend yet.
Right, but then Aang does something incredibly unexpected. Remember, he never actually learned firebend because Zuko's techniques were fundamentally flawed by Iroh. So during this desperate fight for his life, Aang simply stops trying to attack and just watches Ozai.
He just watches him.
He intensely observes the Fire Lord's movements, he dodges lethal blasts by a hair's breadth, and he actively studies the physical mechanics of Ozai's form. And by doing so, he instantly reverse engineers the Chai flow, copying Ozai's exact techniques and learning to master firebending mid-fight, immediately adding the devastating moves to his own arsenal to turn the tide.
It's an incredibly visually dynamic concept. The underdog protagonist utilizing a state of hyper-observation to turn the master's own weapons against him in real time.
It's like the Sharingan from Naruto.
Yes, he isn't relying on years of rote memory. He is relying on his innate spiritual genius to photograph and replicate complex muscle movements on the fly.
It's a very cool visual idea, but we have to admit that it completely undermines the entire established premise of the magic system.
Oh, completely.
The lore spent years establishing that you absolutely need a master to learn the deep discipline, the breath control, and the spiritual roots of an element. You can't just mimic the punch. Here, Aang just observes the physical movement and bypasses all the spiritual discipline entirely.
It breaks the rules of their own universe.
It really does.
Yeah.
But it worked. Aang utilizes his newly copied firebending to finally gain the upper hand. He subdues Ozai, and we reach the ultimate resolution of the war. Now, in the final show, Aang's deep, pacifist refusal to kill Ozai leads to the mystical, almost divine intervention of the ancient lion turtle.
Right.
The creature deciding the lost primordial power of energy bend, allowing him to permanently strip Ozai of his firebending without taking his...
It is a moment of profound spiritual escalation. It introduces a magic older than the elements themselves, providing a solution that perfectly aligns with Aang's unyielding...
It's beautiful.
But how does this resolve in the raw...
Well, in the original series Bible, Aang just does it.
What do you mean he just does it?
The source casually states that he uses a special technique only known to the Avatar to simply reach out and take away Ozai's firebending.
That's it.
There are no ancient mythological lion turtles required to teach him. It's not a newly discovered, terrifyingly powerful ancient magic that he has. It's just a default standard superpower he apparently always had tucked away in his back pocket. He just touches Ozai and turns off his bending like flipping a light switch.
Which completely fundamentally removes the intense moral and spiritual crisis Aang faces in the days leading up to the finale.
Oh, totally.
In the final version, the tension comes from Aang agonizing over whether he must compromise his deeply held pacifist principles to execute the Fire Lord.
Right.
It is a profound philosophical dilemma.
Right. It's the whole point of the finale.
But if taking away someone's bending is just a standard, easily accessible tool in the Avatar's basic toolkit, then that entire agonizing debate is entirely... He always had a clean, non-lethal off switch. He was never actually in danger of compromise moral.
It definitely lowers the philosophical stakes of the climb. But regardless of the mechanics, the deed is done. The war is finally officially over. The Fire Lord is permanently defeated and imprisoned.
Finally.
And this leads us to the epilogue of the series Bible. And honestly, looking at how the creators originally envisioned ending this epic, this epilogue is incredibly, deeply bitter. It is absolutely not the joyous, warm, tea-drinking reunion in the Jasmine Dragon in Ba Sing Se that we know and love.
The foundational group dynamic definitively fractures. The shared, intense trauma of the war that forced them together has concluded, and so has their fragile...
Yeah, the team just completely breaks apart. Zuko ascends the throne, becoming the new Fire Lord, and he vows to work alongside the Avatar to slowly restore balance to the devastated world.
Okay, that part is similar.
Toph decides to leave the group entirely, returning to the Earth Kingdom capital to offer her immense power to help the Emperor physically rebuild the war-torn city. Katara and Sokka finally reunite with their father, Hakoda, and they board a ship to sail back to the South Pole to begin the long process of rebuilding the shattered Southern Water Tribe.
And what about Katam?
The source document explicitly, clearly notes that there is absolutely no romance between Aang and Katara. The Katang relationship does not happen. They all just pack their bags and go their separate...
And what becomes of the Avatar himself? After carrying the weight of the world, how does his story conclude?
Aang reunites with his animal companions, Momo and Appa, and he literally just flies off into the sunset. The source document says he firmly, unshakably believes that the air nomads are still out there, hiding in some remote, unexplored part of the world. It states that by leaving to search for them, Aang finally got the life he always wanted, a life full of endless adventure.
This conclusion raises an incredibly important, profoundly melancholy question about narrative resolution and character growth.
Does it ever?
Does Aang flying off alone, completely convinced that his extinct people are actually just playing an incredibly long game of hide-and-seek, make for a satisfying, heroic ending? Or is it a tragic, deeply unsettling evasion of his reality?
Feels like it.
He has successfully saved the physical world from imperialism, yes, but internally he is still fundamentally running away. He is flatly refusing to accept the agonizing grief of people's genocide, opting instead to embark on an endless delusional quest for a home that simply no longer exists.
It is incredibly sad when you really sit and think about it. He didn't actually grow out of his avoidance. He just postponed dealing with it indefinitely. He saved the world, but he couldn't save himself from the truth.
And that profound, lingering melancholy brings us to our synthesis of this massive document.
So what is this all? We spent the last hour looking closely at the original blueprint.
We really have.
We've seen the chaotic kitchen suspended on the roof and the heavy drawbridge on the front porch. We've explored an alternate reality where beloved Uncle Iroh is a cruel traitor, where Katara is consumed by resentment, where the magic system relies on the weather report, and where Aang locks himself inside a rock while his friends are forced to solve arbitrary riddle. What do we actually take away from studying this chaotic, often toxic first draft?
Well, I think more than anything else, it shows us exactly how messy, experimental, and difficult the creative process truly is.
Oh, yeah.
You don't just wake up and write a masterpiece on the first try. You start with a massive, unwieldy jumble of cool ideas, some of which are structurally sound, and some of which, like blaming the protagonist for a mother's murder, will actively, inevitably collapse the entire building if
It is a testament to the absolute necessity of revision. By deeply iterating on this initial draft, by actively stripping away the forced, distracting love triangles that bogged down the epic tone, by removing the convoluted riddles that stalled the pacing, and by brilliantly transforming Iroh from an inherently evil, one-note saboteur into a profoundly flawed but ultimately redeeming mentor figure, the creators allowed the story space to breathe.
Exactly. They consciously shifted the narrative weight away from grim, mechanical, environmental determinism and moved it toward character-driven empathy, spiritual growth, and the power of choice.
They prioritized discovering the emotional truth of the characters over just throwing dark, edgy twists at the audience for shock value. And while this alternate reality we explored today is undeniably endlessly fascinating, I mean, I am going to be thinking about the geopolitical, demographic advantages of lengthening summers for the Fire Nation economy for a long time. And the debate over Zuko leading a grassroots populist uprising is genuinely compelling to analyze. The final version of the show that actually aired gave us a timeless masterpiece, precisely because the creators ultimately chose to focus on hope and the power of found family rather than resentment and isolation.
The first draft is merely the act of shoveling raw sand into a sandbox so you can eventually figure out how to build a castle.
That's a perfect analogy.
But before we conclude our analysis, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, deeply provocative thought. It is a concept embedded deep in the lore of this original draft that we touched upon earlier, but whose long-term implications are truly existential.
Oh, I know exactly where you're going with this.
In this original series Bible, as we clearly established, the genocide of the air nomads fundamentally, permanently broke the cosmological reincarnation cycle. Aang was explicitly, irrevocably designed to be the absolute last avatar. Furthermore, the avatar in this draft is defined as the physical manifestation of the planetary spirit itself.
The actual spirit of the earth.
Yes. So, consider the reality of that epilogue. Aang flies off into the sunset to live a life of adventure, endlessly searching for an extinct. But he's still a mortal human being. He will eventually grow old, his body will eventually fail, and he will inevitably pass.
Oh, wow.
And when his heart stops beating, what happens then? What happens to a world that is completely, permanently stripped of its planetary, a world forever severed from its cosmological anchor, left entirely alone in the dark to balance its own devastating elemental forces and political conflict without an avatar to guide them for the rest?
That is a genuinely chilling thought. A sprawling, magical universe, fundamentally orphaned by the death of its own cosmos. It makes you realize just how delicate and fragile the balanced fictional worlds truly is, both within the lore itself and in the minds of the writers who are struggling to build them from the ground up. And that is exactly where we're today. Keep questioning the foundations of the media you consume. Keep looking for the erased pencil lines on the blueprints and keep exploring the messy, fascinating drafts of your own favorites. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.